Coming up on Cannabis Coast to Coast News with Alaina Pinto this week, the race to become the 25th state to legalize cannabis could be coming to an end as the House of Representatives in Pennsylvania passes a bill to create a state-run dispensary system to sell to adults. Now it's on to the Senate while their governor is poised to sign when it gets to his desk. We'll have reaction.
And we don't believe this current bill, the way it's constructed, will make it through the Senate. We don't really understand how a state-sponsored cannabis program would actually even work.
For decades, the University of Mississippi has been the only school allowed to study cannabis potency, but now the Department of Government Efficiency is pulling the plug on that program in order to save millions of dollars earmarked for cannabis research. Meanwhile, the U.S. Supreme Court refuses to hear a case from a Mississippi business challenging the ban on advertising in that state. And Ohio passes a law moving the intoxicating hemp products from gas stations and convenience stores to legal dispensaries for sale. And after 52 years, the New York Cannabis Parade has officially been canceled. All that and state cannabis reports from coast to coast on Cannabis Coast to Coast News with Alaina Pinto next.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm Alaina Pinto. This is PCM TV's weekly roundup of cannabis news as we continue to document the fight to end cannabis prohibition at the federal level. We've been documenting that fight for the past 4 years, and you can check that out by downloading the PCM TV app. All you have to do is scan the QR code, and it will take you to the App Store or Google Play. It's free to download. With the app, you can get every week's show on demand on your phone. In the meantime, the 23rd state to legalize adult use of cannabis is ready to start issuing licenses for growing and manufacturing. The state of Minnesota is finally ready to hold their licensing lottery in the first week in June, with licenses being awarded at that time. The industry has been waiting for this for a few years now, and opening a new state market couldn't come at a better time for the industry that continues to struggle with overregulation and unfair taxation. The state that seems poised to be the 25th adult use legal state is Pennsylvania. Their governor, Josh Shapiro, has made it clear he wants to see an adult use market start this year. That state's House of Representatives passed a bill this past week, paving the way for state-run cannabis dispensaries. In an extremely tight vote of 102 to 101, it makes the Cannabis Health and Safety Act a reality, and now that bill moves on to the Senate. This bill also will clear the records of past offenders who were victims of the failed war on drugs. Friend of PCM TV and former Pennsylvania correspondent Claudia Post talked with executive producer Jimmy Young about the chances of this bill getting through the state Senate there.
Let me say this. I'll start off by saying this is political theater. And according to many of the folks that I've spoken with, this is just politics because the state store model is an absurd model. We are the laughingstock of the country. And the reason is because where else except New Hampshire, the tiny little state of New Hampshire, has a state store model? Why is that a state that we want to emulate? Why, I ask people, when we have a whole bunch of other states, we have a smorgasbord of opportunity to look at, study, and pick the best of what's out there. Instead, we're swimming upstream. It's just stupid. And according to folks on the inside, this is not going to be the bill.
Jimmy was able to connect with another person who has a direct connection with the Keystone State. It's Gibran Washington, the CEO of Ethos, a medical dispensary based in Pennsylvania, for his reaction.
Okay, Alaina, thank you so much. And we are so proud to have a member of the Pennsylvania cannabis community in with us on Cannabis Coast to Coast News this week. His name is Gibran Washington. He's a very successful entrepreneur from Pennsylvania, but it's via Florida, right? Because Florida is your home state, correct?
Florida's home state, but I have a home in Philadelphia, so Pennsylvania is home. I pay taxes in Pennsylvania.
Oh, there you go. Well, there you go. And good for you for paying your taxes, by the way. Because in this industry, a lot of people don't like to pay bills, whether it's taxes or not. Anyway, let's keep going. So, big news this week in Pennsylvania: the House of Representatives passes a bill for adult use, 102 to 101, bipartisan lines, was Republicans 101 and Democrats 102. Let's not get into politics if we can help it. Here's my number one question for you. Is this the beginning, or is there another bill in the legislature that may have a better chance to survive what will be, I'm sure, amendments in the Senate?
Yeah, I mean, I think Amend Brown has a really good bill. It's very similar to what Senator Street has over in the Senate that we are behind, and similar bills of such. And we don't believe this current bill, the way it's constructed, will make it through the Senate. We don't really understand how a state-sponsored cannabis program would actually even work. If we want to just kind of talk to the mechanics of how they would be able to accept money, how employees would be able to do these kind of transactions. So as long as it's federally illegal, we really don't understand how the state of Pennsylvania will be able to execute this. But we also don't feel that's an equitable approach to giving people access to cannabis, whether that's from the patient side or from the business side. Because if you go to a state-run model, people who have been disproportionately impacted with the war on drugs won't have an opportunity to have a seat at the table as an ownership seat at the table. And that's something that I think we all want as we talk about the history and the culture of cannabis.
Absolutely. And you guys have 8 locations in Pennsylvania right now. They're obviously all medical because that is the only thing that's allowed in Pennsylvania. It must help to have a governor like Josh Shapiro who backs this effort and wants to sign a bill for adult use in his state. I'm not quite sure, based on everything that I'm hearing and reading about this, that it may be the right bill, but it's certainly, I've pegged Pennsylvania as the 25th state to become an adult use legal. So I hope they don't let me down. The Eagles didn't let me down, so I'm hoping that they don't let me down in the legislative chambers, as it were. Is this the year that it's going to happen?
It's the year we would hope for it to happen. I think, Governor Shapiro has shown that he's an amazing common sense governor. He does what's right for the people of Pennsylvania, and we've been wanting this to happen for several years now. We feel this is a good inflection point. I think there's a lot of states that have gone from medical into the recreational space, and they've seen positive impacts, whether that's from revenue, whether that's from overall health in their municipality. So we believe that, this is the right time. Last year was the right time. So whenever they feel as though they're ready to accept cannabis as a medicinal medicine for more and more Pennsylvanians, we think it's the time is always now.
Since 1968, the University of Mississippi has been the only federally approved college to grow and study cannabis. That program has now fallen victim to President Trump's executive orders to make the government more efficient, thus ending research programs deemed unnecessary. For years, whenever the DEA made a bust or states confiscated illegally grown cannabis, they would send it to the university to study its potency in cannabinoid makeup. Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency made the announcement on May 1st that said, quote, "In the last 2 days, agencies terminated 148 wasteful contracts with a ceiling value of $420 million and savings of $198 million, including a $143,000 HHS contract for the potency monitoring of confiscated marijuana samples." End quote. One more note from Mississippi: a business in that state is suing regulators over their ban on advertising. This case made it all the way to the Supreme Court of the United States, but they have refused to even take a look at that since they believe this is a state issue not protected by free speech as mentioned in the Constitution. Now let's start our state reports with Karen Black in Arizona.
I'm Karen Black from Greenfinger Consulting with the Arizona Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Workers at True Leaves Magnolia Cultivation Facility in Phoenix, the notoriously skunky-smelling one near Sky Harbor Airport, have ratified Arizona's first ever union contract for cannabis cultivation. The historic 4-year deal with UFCW Local 99 includes guaranteed wage increases, paid holidays and time off, and seniority-based promotions. This milestone follows the January 2024 union vote and marks a major step forward for cannabis workers in the state's growing industry. It's also only the second union agreement for Arizona's agricultural workers since 1993. On the legislative front, the Cannabis Advertising Restrictions Bill has been sent to the governor for signature. The final measure is very different from the original text and seems to have found a sweet spot between keeping kids safe and letting businesses do their thing. Governor Hobbs is expected to sign the bill, but if she doesn't, it can still become law with a 2/3 majority legislature vote. There's been no movement on the other two measures, rural opportunity licenses and releasing funds for medical research, so they're likely dead until next session. Speaking of research, a study by Arizona State University found cannabis-related hospital visits in the Grand Canyon state jumped 20% between 2016 and 2021, with a growing number linked to mental health issues like depression and psychosis. Older adults saw the steepest increase. Researchers warn today's more potent cannabis could be driving the trend. Legalization was not a factor since the spike started before adult use sales began. Here's an update to a story we've been following. Arizona's hemp industry is asking the Court of Appeals to step in after a judge refused to block the state from cracking down on sales of hemp-based THC products outside licensed dispensaries. The Hemp Industry Trade Association argues these sales are federally legal, but Attorney General Chris Mays disagrees. The appellate court is now reviewing whether to intervene while enforcement continues. A lower court hearing could resume if the request is denied. And lastly, the Mint Cannabis, based in Guadalupe, Arizona, recently opened its 7th retail location, this one in El Mirage. That's all for this week's Arizona Report. I'm Karen Black from Greenfinger Consulting reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
There's a new vape player expanding into Washington state. Row Vapes has operations in multiple states as they continue to grow their market presence in the vape category, and now they're moving into the Great Northwest. With more from Washington State, here's Matthew Friedlander.
Hey, I'm Matthew Friedlander with Skagit Organics, coming to you with the Washington State Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast. So today I'm reporting from the 10th annual Washington Cannabis Summit hosted by the Cannabis Alliance, Washington's largest and most effective cannabis trade. Our theme this year was 10 years rooted in integrity. And so today we had a full days-long conversation about the history of cannabis, not only here in Washington, but around the world. And we talked a lot about what the future of cannabis looks like here in Washington State. I've talked in the past about Washington having some of the most restrictive residency requirements for ownership of a license here in Washington, which makes this next bit of news a little bit surprising. We've had a new and expanding MSO expanded to Washington, Rove Vapes. And this is not something that we hear about a lot in Washington because, again, of the ownership requirements that you have to live here in Washington and to own a cannabis license. So we don't see a lot of outside investment from these larger companies. So it'll be interesting to see how this fares for this company. We welcome to the I-502 industry here in Washington. And that is what I've got for you today out of Washington. I'm Matthew reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
There's some good news coming out of one of the smallest cannabis markets in the U.S., out of Vermont. Regulators there recognize that their original medical program is floundering. So starting July 1st, they will allow all adult use dispensaries to start selling tax-free medical products once approved by the Vermont Cannabis Control Board. The next up is Virginia, where that governor's race is starting to heat up between the two female candidates to replace the controversial incumbent Glenn the Veto Man, Youngkin, whose term ends this year. Here's Joe Parsons with more from the Cavalier State.
I'm Joe Parsons with the Virginia Cannabis Connection by Higher Education's Coffee Talk, sponsored by 97.5 3WB, and reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. With little surprise, Governor Glenn Youngkin has vetoed yet another cannabis bill that not only passed the legislature, but had strong support in both chambers. HB 1989 would have allowed for an update to product labeling requirements that would have made more clearly the THC and CBD levels. It would have also allowed for medical cannabis deliveries to be at other locations other than the patient's primary residence. This was important for patient access, and with limited delivery windows from the limited number of stores here in the Commonwealth, it would have made the medical program a more reliable and safe option in compared to using the legacy market that still reigns supreme in Virginia. In the governor's veto message, he said, "While accurate labeling is essential to ensure patients receive consistent and safe medical cannabis, this bill would codify the ability to deliver cannabis to commercial businesses and temporary residencies, raising public safety and regulatory concerns." Like all of his vetoes that would advance any portion of Virginia's cannabis programs, his stance for the industry remains the same. And let's be honest, who didn't see this one coming? Here's a not-so-fun fact. Governor Glenn Youngkin has now broken a record. That's right, he broke the Commonwealth's record for the most vetoes in a single year, and the absolute most for any governor in his entire term. So, congratulations, I guess. What is worse is that he's done nothing to advance the industry in a positive way during his entire term, something which he campaigned to not do. He said not only would he uphold the current medical market, but he promised to help start and regulate an adult use market. Instead, he's vetoed almost every piece of reform legislation that has crossed his desk. Now it'll be up to the upcoming historical election to decide the future of cannabis in Virginia. So, that's going to do it for this week. From Higher Education's Coffee Talk, sponsored by 97.5 3WB in Charlottesville, and as always, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News, I'm Joe Parsons. Until next time, stay lifted.
In Maryland, their governor, Wes Moore, has been proactive with his support of the reform of cannabis laws. In 2024, his expungement of 170,000 criminal cannabis records is one of his most proud accomplishments. And this year, in April, Governor Moore signed a law that exempts employee stock ownership plans from the state's 5-year licensing hold requirements. While that was designed to encourage more employee ownership in the industry, it also opened the door to allow businesses to bypass the dreaded 280E tax code that bans cannabis businesses from writing off regular business expenses that every other industry enjoys in order to stay in business. Christopher Bright has more from Maryland.
I'm Christopher Bright from The Enlightened Voice. Welcome to Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'll be bringing you the latest cannabis headlines from Maryland. Maryland's cannabis industry just got a game changer. Governor Wes Moore signed a law exempting employee stock ownership plans, or ESOPs, from the state's 5-year license hold rule. This opens up an exit strategy for cannabis business owners and lets the companies sidestep hefty taxes under Section 280E. ESOPs lets owners sell stock to a trust for employees, deferring capital gains taxes. Massachusetts companies like Theory Wellness and The Vault have been doing this since 2023. Darren of MBO Ventures says this is a smart way to sell to employees and not just private equity. Beyond tax breaks, ESOPs boost worker dedication. Canna Provisions' Meg Sanders says employees now watch every penny, knowing profits hit their pockets. The Vault's Michael add that their ESOP turned their staff into owners focused on success. But ESOPs aren't for all. Attorney Hannah King says you need at least 25 employees and $2 million in earnings. Still, it's a win for founders and teams in the tough market. And for a short mention, I would like to talk about Senator Also Brooks, who has called for the resignation of RFK out of office with the HAS. And this has been the Maryland Cannabis Report for this week. I'm Christopher Bright from The Enlightened Voice, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
That'll do it for the A Block this week, but don't go anywhere. We have another handful of stories from the U.S. before we head to Canada to hear from Debbie Facey on the impact of their transitional government on the legal cannabis industry in that country. And Ben Stevens has a report on Denmark's new medical program. That's our international segment coming up next on Cannabis Coast to Coast News. It all continues after this break.
We focus solely on the cannabis space. The cannabis is not just another item that we've put on our website and said, oh, we're in cannabis. We do cannabis and cannabis only, and we focus on cannabis day in and day out. So with Buds Group, we're going to not only work with you and give you advice, we're going to help see your project through to completion. And you're going to find at the end of the day, it'll be a fraction of a cost of working with a larger firm, because our executives are focused just on cannabis and we run lean.